everybody. Welcome to Spoiler Piece Theater, the podcast that doesn't give a shit about spoilers. We just want to talk about the movies. My name is Dave Riedel. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association, and I write for the Chicago Reader.
My name is Evan Crean. I'm co-chair of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and co-author of your 80s Movie Guide to Better Living. My pronouns are he, him.
And my name is Megan Kearns. My pronouns are she, her. I write film reviews for Edge Media Network. I, too, am a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association, and I'm a member of Gallica, the Society of LGBTQ Entertainment Critics.
Yowza. And got the salute there again for those of you who can't see us. We have two movies on the docket tonight, which we will get into in a moment. But before we do, wanted to take a moment to tell you about our Patreon. Over on the Patreon this week, we are talking about a patron's choice, the 2023 thriller Missing, starring Storm Reed and Nia Long. We had a lively conversation about that very twisty-turny movie. So if you're a patron, go check it out. And if you're not a patron, please consider becoming one. And while I'm at it, I would like to thank our sponsor piece patron, Heather Sachs. Thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Heather.
And ye old movies we're talking about tonight. Oh, they're not ye old. They're ye new.
Ye new. Yeah.
We have
both ye new.
That's right. We have Biosphere, directed by Mel Eslin, written by Mark Duplass and Mel Eslin, starring Sterling K. Brown and Mark Duplass. His name is in that a lot. Mark Duplass. Mark Duplass. And then we also have The Lesson, which is Richard E. Grant, Julie Delpy, Darren McCormick. And we are going to kick things off with Biosphere. Here is the really... Actually, this is a decent sentence from IMDb, or from the marketing department that IMDb put on their page. In the not-too-distant future, the last two men on Earth must adapt and evolve to save humanity.
Underline on the evolve, which initially, when I read the plot summary, I thought to myself, okay, well, then maybe they have to, like, personally evolve.
Nope.
Not physically evolve.
Yeah, this is biologically evolve. So anyway, they're lifelong. Oh, go ahead, Megan. You were going to say something.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I'm actually, this is the kind of movie I'm so glad why Spoiler Piece exists, because there's no way to talk about this movie without spoiling the entire thing.
It's true.
For sure. Yeah, I'm so glad I'm the host this week, because now I have to describe this movie.
Wait, you don't want to describe this?
Yeah. So it's two guys stranded in a dome.
A biodome.
A biodome.
Not to be confused with the Pauly Shore movie, Biodome.
Right. And Sterling K. Brown is the scientist. And as you learn, Mark Duplass was president of the United States. And he inadvertently, or as it turns out, maybe advertently, destroyed the planet. And as far as they know, they're the only two people left alive. And they have been having a lifelong disagreement about whether this bowling ball appeared at a birthday party or not. And that sort of underpins the entire, it's hard to describe how it ties in, but it becomes like a focal point for like magic versus science versus this is what's really happening.
Yeah, so that's one of the underlying themes of the movie is like logic versus, logic and science versus, magic and emotion.
And belief.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Although most of the movie is two guys playing Nintendo, but whatever.
True. And talking about Mario.
Most of the movie, but
yeah. I don't know. I think that's most of the movie.
Yeah.
It is a lot. You're right. I was kind of being flippant about it. I'm like, no, they do talk about Mario and Luigi a whole fuck of a lot. And so what happens is one day they realize that, Sterling K. Brown has set this up as a self-sustaining biosphere, hence the name of the movie. And so they have vegetables and things like that, and they have fish, and the fish start dying. And they're like, uh-oh, the fish start dying, then we're going to die. And then following the next day, one of the fish is like changed color, and its gills are sloughing off, or they're being replaced by other gills. I don't remember what it is, but Sterling K. Brown picks it up and he's like, this is, it's like, hey, put me back in the water, and puts it back in the water. Like, this fish is strange. And then they realized it's evolving. The last female fish had died, and then they ate it. And then they realize that this male fish is becoming female, even though this species, this particular subset of fish doesn't do that, although lots of other fish do that. And it's like, oh, it's adapting to, it's evolving to be able to like survive. And then Mark Duplass quotes Jurassic Park. Which, of course, Sterling K. Brown's like, you're quoting Jurassic Park? He's like, well, it's kind of true. And then then they realize, or Mark Duplass realizes, that he is evolving to become able to reproduce. So, and then the movie becomes about, oh, this has happened. Well, maybe we're the last two people, and maybe we're not going to be the last two people anymore. And then, the whole time the movie's going on, there's this like green light coming through the window that keeps getting bigger and bigger, and they don't know what it is. And you learn that there's no atmosphere on the planet anymore. Whatever Mark Duplass did as president of the United States to destroy the planet, destroyed the atmosphere. And then they realize that the atmosphere is returning, or at least they think that's what's happening. And so the big question is, will they or won't they? And they do. And it ends up they're maybe, if they survive long enough, are going to repopulate the Earth. That's the short version, I guess.
Yeah.
Sterling K. Brown does a lot of crying in this movie. He's very good at it. Mark Duplass does a lot of Mark Duplassing in this movie. He's very good at it.
I like that you turned his name into a verb.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's kind of, when he's in things that he is very closely associated with, either as a writer or a producer, this is kind of the stock character he plays. This likable, smart, but goofy person. And he does it really, really well. He does other things well too, but he's really good at playing this character. I'm glad that at some point Sterling K. Brown described him as a meat puppet who became the president of the United States, because the whole time, like after you figure out that he was the president, I was like, this fucking guy was president? Jesus. I believe that less than I believe. Yeah. Right? I believe that less than I believe Donald Trump was president,
Yeah, I totally thought it was a joke at first. Like, I thought they were joking. Like, the fact that the two of them were left alive, I thought he had pronounced himself as president as like a joke. So, right. Yeah, much like you, when you find out, I'm like, what? Anyway.
Yeah. And you don't know exactly what he did to end the world. I'm guessing nuclear bomb proliferation. I don't know. Although I think if you were in the middle of a nuclear winter, the things wouldn't happen the way they do outside the dome. So anyway,
very true.
So in the center of the movie, there becomes this, I guess the it's not the fulcrum, because it's not entirely what the movie's about, but them basically deciding whether or not they're gonna try to procreate now that they can, if they choose to. And then that was a strange part, because Sterling K. Brown, drops the F-bomb in there. And that was weird.
Oh, you mean the sex scene is weird?
No, not the sex. I mean, the sex scene is unusual. Yeah. No, I mean, when he says, I'm not an F word, and he stops himself.
Oh, yes.
And
yes.
I was like,
yes.
Yee!
Yes. Sorry, I'm thinking fuck F word, not the terrible, horrendous one.
The 6-letter F word is the one I'm talking about.
The horrible one. Yes.
And I was just like, oh my God, they went there. And then later he explains that, he came from a hyper-masculine house, and that's just drilled into him. And it's kind of an apology, but then they end up deciding to repopulate the Earth, I guess. They don't really talk about it in terms of like, hey, let's have sex because it's fun. It's like,
yeah, it's looked at like in a scientific experiment. That's part of the humor of them attempting to have sex, is like, we gotta make it as clinical as possible, and let's take all the sexiness out of the sex. Like, how can we literally just put penis in vagina and make this happen?
Yeah, I've never seen the TV show, The Handmaid's Tale, but I have seen the movie. And in the movie, they just cut a hole in the bed sheet, and that's exactly what Mark Duplass does, except this bed sheet has, like blue lines on it because it's not just a white sheet. because there's, I don't know, that's slightly funnier, I guess. It's also that exactly that it's just a bed sheet that he picked up and put on top of himself. But there's this interesting thing that happens later in the movie when Mark Duplass does become pregnant and says, I've been thinking a lot about gender lately. It's like, I feel like a man, but I can, I've got this thing growing inside me that's a baby. Wow. And the movie does try to do a few easy jokes about the his emotional state, I guess you would say, as he evolves. But then it also goes in some unexpectedly sensitive directions too. So it's I don't know. It's a mixed bag. I didn't really like or dislike this. The thing that I had the problem with so much was it was just two guys yapping for so much. I was just like, there's a lot of yapping in this movie. This is yapping central. Yap, yap. It's a good thing it's Sterling K. Brown yapping because he is a captivating presence. And so is Mark Duplass. But I think if we're talking about like actors versus actors, then, Sterling K. Brown is kind of like the superior performer here. But I guess that's really neither here nor there. What did you all think of it? Okay, Megan went first on the Patreon. Again, Evan, you go first this time.
Okay. Well, I actually really enjoyed this movie. It surprised me with its depth. I as I mentioned, I kind of I read the plot summary and kind of thought this movie was going to be about two guys who have been living in this biosphere, maybe getting under each other's skin and figuring out whether they can exist outside of it, if they're going to try and make an attempt outside of it, if they're going to meet other survivors, what have you. And so it surprised me in a good way in the direction the story took, in the ways that it was exploring these themes about, science and logic versus belief and magic. I definitely was not expecting that in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
Its exploration of gender, sexuality, the relationship between these two men as lifelong friends, and how their relationship grows and changes over the course of the movie and takes on new dimensions. These were all things I was not expecting from two guys in a biosphere movie. And really, for me, what I went into this thinking was, I love Sterling K. Brown. I love Mark Duplass. I'll watch them in a room together for hour and a half just to kind of see what goofy situations they might get themselves into. So
yeah,
this movie had a lot more depth than I was expecting. And so I really dug it for those reasons. And I think they're both give great performances. I think they have great on-screen chemistry together. I said this off mic. I want to make sure I say it again on mic. I think Mark Duplass is a very underrated actor. I've seen him in a lot of things, movies and TV shows, and he's always brings it. I think he always is really good, and he can work with all different kinds of material. And Dave, I think you said this, that he's very charismatic, and so he can be a very captivating person on screen, and Sterling K. Brown always is. So I feel like that's just kind of like, oh, I see him and I know I love him and people love him, but I wanted to give props to Mark Duplass because I don't think enough people kind of give him props for his chops.
Yeah, I'll just say real quick is that he does so much of his own stuff that I think that sometimes you forget. Is he in the Natalie Morales movie that we like so much? He is, right?
Yes.
Yes. And he's terrific in that. And that's a different kind of role for him.
Yes.
In that. But anyway, Megan, how about you? How do you feel about, I was going to call it Biosphere.
Yeah, so I'll start with Mark Duplass just because, Evan, you ended with Mark Duplass. And yeah, I do like him as an actor, often as a writer. I think it's very interesting that he appears to be, through his work, exploring masculinity and gender through films like Hump Day, through this film, through Language Lessons where he plays a gay character. So there's something, I feel like, I don't want to say something going on, but I find it very fascinating, the roles that actors gravitate towards. And I think there's something like maybe he is exploring, traditional notions of gender and masculinity and queerness. And I have to say, I really like the concepts of this film. I like the premise. I love an apocalyptic film. Love sci-fi. I love the biodome notion because I loved it in one of my favorite films, Silent Running.
Yeah.
I love
Very
the
Silent
question.
Running vibes.
So great. I didn't actually get Silent Running vibes, just the premise. But yes, I agree. I love Silent Running. But I love the questions it's raising around, like you said, Evan, like around gender. I wish it had. I find it interesting that a film that is dealing with issues and body changes doesn't explicitly mention transness, but it is very much trans bodies and trans people are very much alluded to because, you know, when Mark Duplass's character is talking about, he's like, I don't want to lose my penis. You know, I don't want it to turn into a clitoris. I don't want to lose my testicles. And Sterling K. Brown says, well, you're not the first person to have a body that, you know, is not the right body or the body that they want to be in. Although that's not an accurate description either for a lot of trans people. A lot of trans people will say, like, it's not that I have the wrong body. This is my body. It's society that, you know, misgendered me, or society, you know, assigning gender before I could tell them. So, but I like those ideas. And I like that this is a film exploring those ideas. And I like that Zachary Drucker, who is a trans filmmaker, is a producer on this, possibly to advise, possibly not sure. But I didn't actually like this film. And I feel badly about that because I love Sterling K. Brown and I think he's amazing here. And I like Mark Duplass. I don't actually think he's very good here personally. Just didn't feel believable to me, did not work for me. And there were moments that I thought were really interesting, but overall I found this very tedious. I was bored through most of it. And I like movies that are just about conversations. I like conversations about video games and pop culture and, you know, questions of gender and sexuality. And it just didn't land for me. And there was something artificial about this that just didn't ring true, that just didn't feel emotionally resonant. And just did not work for me. But I like that it's tackling these ideas and I like that it's raising these questions about, you know, what makes a man and are you still a man if you have a different body and what does it mean to be able to reproduce? And, you know, and I do like that Mark Duplass's character comes to realize like, no, I'm questioning it, but I am a man. And I do like that. And the sex scene was very jarring. Not because it's between two guys, obviously, but it's just very jarring that Mark Duplass has a sheet over his face and the hole, and then all of a sudden Sterling K. Brown rips off the sheet, and I don't know, the way it's filmed, the way it is very jarring. But yeah, this unfortunately just did not work for me. But I like the ideas it's delving into.
Yeah, I think that you're right. Mark Duplass does really explore what notions of, you know, masculinity are a lot, which I hadn't really thought about, but he does. And the other thing that he does in his writing a lot is he asks questions. I mean, I had no idea that this was going to be about actual evolution, you know, and gender roles and things like that going into this. I thought it was just going to be two guys yapping, which a lot of it is, as I said before. I think I land somewhere between the two of you. I think it's a really good idea. I think they're both really good. I didn't really like Sterling K. Brown's character very much, just because he's so buttoned up. And he does become less buttoned up over the course of the movie, but I mean, I don't know if it's appropriate to compare the two, but as far as character arcs go, his character arc isn't quite on the level of Mark Duplass's.
No.
So I don't really know, but I think he, like we've said, he's such a captivating performer that, you know, great, happy to watch him. And I agree with you, Evan. I think that Mark Duplass is really underrated too. Unlike you, Megan, I did think he was, I mean, I don't think he's going to win any fucking awards for this, but I thought he was fine. You know, I think that playing this role must be a challenge because, I mean, I don't know. I mean, how many people have written movies about somebody who's like evolving into a different, you know, gender? I'm not sure. Probably not. As a matter of science. I don't know. It's just so, I don't know how to talk about it really. But the big problem I had was just like, kind of like you, Megan, just like two guys in a room yapping, just like, oh boy. There's a whole, I just keep, in case you haven't noticed, listeners, yapping is the word I use when I don't really particularly care for the talking going on. So,
yeah, a film that
anyway.
relies so heavily on the dialogue, which is great, which is fine. That's fine. But I feel like the dialogue has to be scintillating in order for it to really work. And it just, I don't know if you feel that way, Dave, but for me, it just wasn't.
Well, in that way, it really feels like two friends. This movie feels like two friends talking, or at least two people who know each other very well talking. And I'm not sure I necessarily want to hear those conversations, because what if I don't like you, And I don't want to fucking hear what you two are talking about. Fuck off. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's my thing with it. But I don't really have anything more to add. I mean, I think it's worth watching just because, I haven't seen anything like it before. Well, I've seen two people in a room talking before, but not with the subject matter. Mm-hmm. Evan, how about you? Do you do you have any final thoughts?
What did you two think of the score for this movie? The kind of, was it all a cappella? Like,
I felt like there was a keyboard in there or a synthesizer in there somewhere, but it was mostly like wordless harmonizing.
Yeah, I wasn't
it
a
drove
huge
me
fan
nuts.
of it. Yeah, I didn't like it.
I got used to it. I'm not sure I liked it though.
I felt the ending was kind of abrupt. The way it was edited. For sure. I liked the sentiment of it. The like, oh, let's see if the bowling ball theory holds true. It does. We hear the thud of the bowling ball. So okay, magic.
Yeah.
And like we know that these characters are gonna somehow make it without us having to like watch them, emerge from the biosphere or whatever comes next.
Well, they didn't have the budget for that.
Right.
So
but I felt like the ending was kind of abrupt. That was something I was like, whoa, okay, the movie's over now.
Yeah.
Like someone just like, hit the brakes and pulled a hard like left turn and like jerked the movie to an end.
Well, I kind of feel like in that way, it's like, we've made a $1 million movie, but if we take the story any farther, then it's going to be a $100 million movie. And we can't do that. So this is where the movie ends.
Mm-hmm.
I guess. I don't know.
It didn't work for me in the ending.
I was going to say, I don't, it's interesting that you talk about budget, Dave, because I always, and this is probably not necessarily the best example, but I always come back to Moon, and that had a tiny budget, and that looks like a huge budget for a film. So anyway, I feel like there's creative ways to deal. But yeah, no, it felt very abrupt to me too, Evan. I was wondering what you would think about that ending because I was like, I don't think Evan's going to like this abrupt ending.
Yeah, you know how I feel about endings and how they can really ruin a movie. And it didn't ruin the movie for me.
Oh, good.
It just felt kind of abrupt. But good reference on Moon. Moon is a movie that does look like it has a very high budget. And it's impressive that it didn't.
I still need to see that.
Oh,
don't give me the eyes. Good. I know.
Yeah, definitely worth watching.
What? You haven't seen
No, I didn't give you those eyes. I was like,
no, I know.
You need to see it. It's so good.
I know. I can't believe that I haven't seen a movie written and directed by David Bowie's kid. I mean, that's weird.
Right?
Because I love all things David Bowie, as you probably don't know on the show. Anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, you have something else?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I've been racking my brain because Dave, you mentioned like I haven't seen another movie like this as far as evolution, and it's killing me because I can't remember the name of the film. But there was a film we saw last year that was a horror sci-fi film that is about evolution, and it is about bodies changing and becoming. It's not changing gender, but it's becoming new species, and it was. I liked it more than you guys did, so maybe that's why it's not ringing a bell. But anyway, I feel like usually on the horror front, there are films that are, exploring changing bodies. There's also Lee Janiak's film Honeymoon that's kind of explores that too.
Annihilation to a degree.
Annihilation, absolutely. Yeah, so body horror definitely explores those things, but not so much changing gender and not in a comedic way. So yeah, so I think that's interesting. Anyway,
and also this is not and this is not a horror. This isn't body horror. This is just body changing.
Right. So I think in that way, like there's ties to other things, but I think in that way you're absolutely right that it is very much its own art form, its own film, its own thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well then, sounds like we're all talked out on that. So we'll move on to The Lesson, written and directed. Oh, no, written by Alice Troughton. No, sorry, let me get there. Directed by Alice Troughton, written by Alex McKeith, starring Richard E. Grant, Julie Delpy, and Daryl McCormick. And here is your one-sentence IMDb summary. Man, this is short. A young author takes a tutoring position at the estate of a legendary writer. That is true.
That's sparse.
That tells you nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, you should have read the one from like the press email, because that's the one that actually got me interested in seeing the
Oh, really? You know what? I should find that. But in the interim, I guess the best way to describe it is this movie thinks it's a thriller, and
Yeah.
I think I kind of gave away how I feel about it.
Wow.
This movie thinks it's a thriller about Daryl McCormick is this young writer. He takes a tutoring position at this estate. The writer in question is Richard E. Grant, who plays, a fictional but very famous writer who has won all kinds of literary awards and things like that. He's married to Julie Delpy, who I can't remember. Is she an artist or she's a curator or curator? In a very what I thought was un-Julie Delpy-like performance. I don't want to pigeonhole anybody, but I don't think I've seen her play anybody who's quite so quiet and steely.
Agreed.
And so Daryl McCormick is hired to tutor Richard E. Grant's and Julie Delpy's son to get into Cambridge or Oxford or something like that. And they're like, he has to get in. He has to get into their creative writing program or whatever they say over and over. And the thing underpinning all of this is that they had another son named Felix who drowned himself in a pond on their property, and Richard E. Grant found him. And there's this unspoken tension between the three surviving family members about not necessarily what really happened to Felix, because they all have a pretty good idea. But, apparently Felix was writing a novel, but, they can't find it. But it turns out that Richard E. Grant found it and he's finishing it. And he gives it to Daryl McCormick to... It sounds like he gives it to Daryl McCormick to read and like give him notes back. That's what it sounded like to me. And then Daryl McCormick does read it. And he says, the first 2/3 of this is amazing. He's like, it's you, but you found a way to make yourself fresh. It's unbelievable. He's like, but I feel like the last third or so, the ending really just kind of falls apart. And then Daryl McCormick has given his novel to Richard E. Grant, who then just, of course, tears it apart and becomes a complete asshole. And that part of his character comes out more and more and more. I mean, you see glimpses of it all along, but then he sort of slips into asshole mode and just sort of stays there for the end of the movie. And the impression that I got is that the other son, Felix, unalived himself because of his father's just relentless, I don't even know what you would describe it as. Criticism, needling, pushing, something. I don't know.
Yeah, his inability to offer any kind of like love or approval to the son.
Right.
Yikes.
So what ends up happening, because this is a thriller, as I said, Daryl McCormick and Richard E. Grant get into a fight in the pond, and Daryl McCormick kicks him in the face, and then Richard E. Grant chooses to drown himself. And then Julie Delpy says, okay, so you signed this NDA, which I forgot to mention. You signed this NDA, so you've got to get out of here. And as far as you're concerned, my husband finished the novel, because one of the things Daryl McCormick does is he discovers that Richard E. Grant has been finishing his son's novel. And so he deletes the hard copy off the computer. He deletes the copy from the computer. He throws the hard copy in the pond. He destroys it. And then because he has a pretty good, an almost photographic memory, he writes it out longhand with Richard E. Grant's help, and they finish the ending together. And so Julie Delpy's whole scheme has been to find out what happened to Felix specifically. And she realizes that her husband, or she always knew, that her husband's a fucking asshole. And via the NDA, she says, Daryl McCormick, whose character's Liam, that's his name. Jesus Christ. I kept saying Daryl McCormick because I couldn't remember his name. Liam, you've got to, as far as everybody's concerned, you were never here. You signed an NDA and this is a suicide. But if you tell anybody you were here, then I'm going to tell everybody that you murdered my husband and see you later. And so the movie, in a very J.J. Abrams sort of way, is bookended by starting in the present, where Daryl McCormick has published his first novel to wild praise. And it has the same title as the novel that Richard E. Grant tells him is terrible, but it's clearly a very different story. And it's about, a patriarch who's just who's just like grinding his family down and all these things. And the author's like, not the author, the interviewer at this, whatever it is, it's like one of those things that the New Yorker hosts when Lydia Tarr sits down, whatever. It's like, how did you get the inspiration to write this novel? And the whole movie's a flashback. And then it ends with him in the chair. And then the younger son is up in the balcony, kind of like smiling at him. And it's like, oh, you killed my dad. At least that's what it felt like. So, why don't you two start? I'll fill in. I mean, it's pretty clear how I feel, but I'll get into the specifics later. Megan, what did you think of this?
So I was really excited to see this, and because I love Richard E. Grant. He's always a delight. He's always magnetic and just absolutely charismatic. I really liked Julie Delpy tremendously, especially in the Before trilogy. I liked Daryl McCormick a great deal in Good Luck to You, Leo Grand. And I know you've already kind of shown your cards, Dave, but I liked this. This is not a thriller in the traditional sense. Like, it's not super tense.
Right.
There are red herrings along the way, though. Like, there's the scene where Richard E. Grant has fallen asleep and Liam comes in and he has a pillow and it looks like he might like choke him, but he just puts it behind his head. And, there's shots of the lake and there's kind of like, there's little bits here and there that lead you to believe like there might be some foul play or something's going to happen. There's the scene where Richard E. Grant is watching a noir film and, where a woman murders another woman. So there are those little noir touches. And especially by the end. And I really like that. And I like that Liam completely underestimates Julie Delpy. Like, she is vicious and she's calculating and she knows exactly what she's doing. And he completely underestimates her. I don't know if it's because they had sex. I don't know why he did, but he does. Maybe because she seems deferential to Richard E. Grant in their marriage. Not sure. But I liked this. I liked this a lot. And I think if you go in expecting like a traditional thriller, you'll be very disappointed because it's not tense in that way at all. But if you just kind of take this as a drama and just kind of watch it unfold, at least for me anyway, I really enjoyed it. So I liked the performances. I liked being in this world. I liked watching what was going to happen. And I will say I have heard this before that very rarely do films about writing get writing correct. And I don't think this is a film that necessarily gets writing correct. And it also hammers the notion like great writers or good writers, borrow from the greats and, excellent writers steal. And it hammers that home too many times that I was like, oh, well, Liam's going to steal a manuscript or Richard E. Grant stole a manuscript. Like, it was very obvious that there was going to be book theft going on, like very obvious. So it's way too obvious on that front. Aside from those missteps, I did enjoy this.
Okay. Well, we'll put you in column B. Do
I want to be in column B? I don't know.
It's just a different column from mine. Evan, how about you?
I'm going to describe my opinion as a little column A, little column B. So I did like this. I didn't love it. I think the press email described this as a taut noir thriller, which got me really excited. And I feel like it was noir for sure, but for me, it was not taut and
no,
it was not thrilling. There were some good red herrings, like you said, Megan. The scene where I thought he was going to try to smother Richard E. Grant with that pillow, that was actually really good. I had me on the edge of my seat because it was so slow, his movements.
Yes.
But I feel like I kept waiting for this movie to take off, and it just never did for me. I liked the premise. I like Daryl McCormack. I like Richard E. Grant. I like Julie Delpy. I mean, she's a great femme fatale in this. She really
is.
She really does. Pull the wool over Liam Daryl McCormack's eyes, and it really well done in her plot to get rid of her shitty husband. And Richard E. Grant is just so fantastic as the arrogant asshole, no one can ever please him kind of guy. From the moment we see him walk into that dinner where his fucking personality takes up the entire room and no one can fucking breathe under the weight of it. And like even the next day when Liam comes to dinner and he's turned away. Oh, Liam, you can go eat in the guest house. This is family only. And it's just,
so rude.
So rude. And then they give him clothes. They're like Felix's old clothes. They don't tell him it's Felix's clothes. So there's just some creepy stuff going on. So there was stuff here that I was enjoying. I just didn't feel like it took off to any degree that really got me excited about what was going on, but it was nice to see them get revenge against this fucking shithead father who was stealing his son's work while driving him to commit suicide, and then in turn being driven to drown himself in shame.
Yeah, boy, I'm way more in column A than you both. I just found this. It's interesting that I didn't have a problem with the pacing, because I don't think languid's the right word, but it certainly is not breakneck.
No.
And I liked Daryl McCormack's performance a lot. I feel like it was really understated, and he plays kind of a smart dunderhead in a pretty well. But unfortunately, I just don't know. I just saw everything coming. And this is not, oh, Dave guesses the ending. This is just, I just don't think this was written well enough to really be a surprise in any way. I think Julie Delpy was very good, but it's so clear that she's in control from the moment you see her.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like, well, what's she planning? And then you see Richard Grant, like you said, Evan, he comes in, takes over the room with that thing. And I'm like, this is a marriage where she's decided she's had enough and she's trying to find a way to do away with him, and she's figured it out, and she needs Liam to be the pawn. And the other thing was when Richard Grant, E. Grant starts having computer problems and Liam goes in to help him fix it because his dad used to be in IT, and how convenient. He says, oh, there's another server connected here. And Richard E. Grant's like, oh, that's all right. Don't worry about that server. And I'm like, well, that's where his fucking dead son's book is. Jesus Christ. I mean, it's just like fucking unreal how predictable this, like right when the scene when Julie Delpy and Daryl McCormack, have sex, it's just like the scene starts and I'm like, well, this is the scene where they have sex. It was just like really, it bummed me out.
Yeah.
And then when the whole thing was like her plan, I was like, none of this is shocking to me. Like just the way this is written, this is exactly where it's going. It just so happens that it's really well acted. And it's just well acted enough to not be a total fucking disappointment. But I think that, Richard E. Grant's character is one of those people who's I probably sound like him right now. His character is obviously one of those people who thinks he's the smartest person in the room every time, but he's not even the second smartest. He's probably like in the middle or lower. He's just, it's so clear that he's just a fucking dope who happens to be a very famous writer, And because he's a very famous writer, he's got this fucking huge ego. And it's just like you're waiting for him to just have the rug pulled out from under him or to, drown himself out of shame, as you said, Evan. So I don't know. I just, this thing, it just, it doesn't make me mad. It was just like, oh God, what a waste of time. That's kind of more how I felt about it.
Yikes.
Yeah. But not a waste of time. Like, I'm not going to get those 2 hours back. It's more just like, well, I could have made a fucking pie in this time instead of watch this fucking movie.
Ooh, what kind of pie?
Oh, obviously a cherry pie. I mean, give me a break. So that's how I felt about, the lesson by Leo Grand or whatever it's called. So
no, just the lesson.
I know the lesson.
Oh yeah.
Leo Grand is the other movie that Jeremy McCormick's in that we've seen. Yeah, I don't know. That's all column A. Which I don't know. Actually, you two should. Megan's column should be column A. That's like the good column, right? I'm column B.
Okay.
And Evans, yeah.
Yeah.
The I liked it is column A. Yeah. Do we have final thoughts on the lesson?
I mean, I don't think you're like, the thing of it is I don't think you're wrong, Dave. Like it is definitely a predictable film, but it just somehow like I guess predictability doesn't always detract from my enjoyment. But I agree with you. I wish this was a much more, and I agree with both of you. I wish this was much more taut. I wish this was tenser. Even if it wasn't a thriller specifically, I wish it was more intense. I wish it had sharper writing, because the performances are just so great. And that probably is why I overlooked, the flaws and the missteps, just because this is a great cast and I liked it and I liked what was happening. But I totally understand where your perspective is and where you're coming from, that it just didn't land with you and you're so frustrated because it was so predictable. So
yeah.
I feel like there's just a lot of stuff in this movie that just feels like it happens, and not that there's it's not that it feels like when I was watching it that there were like calculated things that were happening, or like little nods to whatever, Liam was trying to do, or Helen, I don't know. It didn't feel like it was operating on a higher level, that it was, teasing us with these like cat and mouse mental psychological things that the characters were doing to each other. It just kind of felt like this is what's happening, and we're experiencing it on a surface level. And then you find out later, okay, Julie Delby's character has had some other stuff, but it didn't feel like it was doing a lot of stuff to like kind of hint at that or show us that the characters were operating on a deeper level.
Right. I actually completely agree with you, Evan. I feel like any nuance or depth that the characters have is strictly because of the caliber of the actors, not necessarily because those characters are written in a very complex way. Like, sometimes when you're watching a film, like you can see the machinations beneath the surface, beneath the facade of that character. And that's not happening here. So I very much agree with you on that. So, like, I think you said this, Dave, like, yeah, you did. Thank God for these actors.
Yeah.
But thank God for these actors. And it was enough for me to enjoy the film. But it could have been such a much better movie.
Yeah. It had potential.
It did. It did.
I don't know. This is really kind of I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think, Richard E. Grant has a tendency, and warranted most of the time he does it, I think, to be really big.
Yes.
And it's always kind of interesting to me that one of his most understated characters is in Bram Stoker's Dracula, which everybody else in that movie is like out of their goddamn minds. And he's just like
Camp City.
Yeah. And he's just kind of like, I'm the doctor in this movie.
You are so right. I always forget he's even in that because he's so subdued.
Yeah. And it's like, you just forget until you watch it. You're like, oh, Bill Campbell, Cary Elwes, and Richard E. Grant are the fucking three guys. And you forget they're in it because Gary Oldman is just chewing the scenery. And so is Winona Ryder to a degree. But,
and even Keanu Reeves is too.
Yeah. The bastard's gone young again. So.
Oh man, that movie's out of control.
Movie. Who described as the horniest movie? I heard somebody.
Oh yes, somebody. Yeah, I've read that too. Somewhat.
I don't know where it was, but like, this is the horniest movie. I'm like, yes, it is.
Yes,
but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the lesson.
Also, speaking of that, but I will say, I think that kind of dovetails nicely into bringing it back to the lesson. Because I feel like with not all, of course, but I feel like with a lot of noir, there is this intensity. There is kind of this, for lack of a better word, this horniness, this like lustful nature happening. And not even just like with sex or illicit romances, but there's intensity, this heat happening. And for a noir, and it does have noir touches, it doesn't have that. So
no, it just has that really, really awkward scene where he sees across the way from the guest house Richard E. Grant going down on Julie Delpy, and Julie Delpy just looks up at him, locks eyes with him, and smiles.
By the way, that is the most, like, the way we see Richard E. Grant going down on Helene, Julie Delpy, it's the most, like, clinical, like, it is so not sexy at all. It's just like, what is happening?
Yeah, it's funny. You get the impression he's like, I must do this for my work.
Yeah.
He probably does do it for his work. Exactly.
Don't want to do this, but I must do it for my work. My work needs this.
Well, he's so in love with himself, he'd probably, well, anyway.
He probably
you know
would.
where I was going with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
He would if he could.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, it sounds like we've reached the end of this lesson. Let's do a quick recap of the things, shall we? We talked about Biosphere. I almost called it Biodome again. My God. Talked about Biosphere, and I have never even seen Biodome, for Christ's sake.
Neither.
That's the other thing. How do we feel about Biosphere? I almost did it again. Would we recommend it to our listenership?
So, if we're just going by enjoyment, I wouldn't. But I do think it's worth watching because there's so many interesting ideas happening. So for that alone, I would recommend it.
How about you, Evan?
I'm also in the yay category for both enjoying it and for the same reasons that Megan mentioned, for the themes that it explores.
Why MMV, everybody?
Ding, ding, ding. I agree with you, Dave.
And I cannot, in good conscience, recommend the lesson. I can recommend that the studio burn the negative or delete it from the hard drive.
Oh.
Well, it's just kind of useless. I mean, as far as I'm concerned.
Ouch.
Maybe that's what it is. You know how, like, there are movies that are so awful you just can't believe it. And then there are movies that are so wonderful, you're like, everybody. But then there are the movies that are just so, as far as I'm concerned, not as far as others are concerned, that are just so kind of just like, you're like, who cares if they fucking exist or not? I don't know.
There's an argument. I've seen this a lot. I'm not the first one to come up with this, but I've seen an argument. There is an argument to be made about just kind of films that are okay. Films that are decent or good and not amazing. Like, not everything has to be the best or the worst, but, you know. But that's a conversation for another time. I, however, again, as I said at the beginning of my sharing my thoughts on this film, I think if you go in thinking it's going to be a taut noir thriller, you're going to be severely disappointed. Like, go in just for the cast, go in with low expectations, and then maybe you'll enjoy it like I did. But yeah, it's not the greatest thing, but I did enjoy it.
Go in with expectations as low as Richard E. Grant's characters of his sons.
Oh, I will say I'm very glad that we reviewed 2 women-directed films, both directorial debuts this week.
Oh, yeah.
That's cool.
Yes.
Very cool. And on that note, that coolness, this brings a close to Spoiler Piece Theory. We've told you what we think of the movies, so now you can go out and watch them or forget about them. The lesson, Anyway, want to thank our editor, Otto Clammer. Thank you, Otto, for making us sound great each week.
Thank you so much, Otto.
Thanks, Otto.
You can find Spoiler Piece Theater anywhere you get podcasts. You can find us at our website, spoilerpiece.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we're on social media. Spoiler Piece Theater on Facebook, at Spoiler Piece on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. You can email us, spoilerpiece@gmail.com. Send us a note and tell us that The Lesson is the greatest movie you've ever seen. The greatest noir thriller that's so taut that you've ever seen.
So taut, it clotheslined you.
That's exactly right. Or you can give us a call
at 862-21-PEACE.
Leave us a voicemail. Let us know what you thought of the movies or our opinions of said movies. If you like the show, please rate and review us by going to ratethispodcast.com/spoilerpiece, or you can rate us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That really helps us out. And if you really like the show, please consider joining our Patreon. As I said before, this week we discussed a patron's pick, the 2023 thriller Missing. I was going to say thriller ? But yeah, it's a thriller. And that, as they say, is that. My name is Dave Riedel. I write for the Chicago Reader. I'm a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association. And if you want to follow me on social media, I'm Dave Sees Movies on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd.
My name is Evan Crean. I'm co-chair of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and co-author of your 80s Movie Guide to Better Living. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as Real Recon, and that's real as in film reel.
And my name is Megan Kearns. I write film reviews for Edge Media Network. I, too, am a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and am a member of Gallica. You can follow me on Twitter at OpinionSWorld or on Instagram and Letterboxd at TheOpinionS.
See you next week, everyone. Thank you.